Hello, boys and girls. Pastel principles are back in action. Today in class, we're going to talk about U.S. history, specifically the time period known as the Reconstruction era. The Reconstruction era began in 1865 when Robert Edward Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, ending the Civil War. The Reconstruction era ended in 1877 with the election of Rutherford B. Hayes. During the Reconstruction era, the goal was to rebuild the United States, specifically the South, and to focus on increasing African American rights. Today we're going to take a detailed look at the amendments of the Reconstruction era, specifically looking at the effect of the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment and how they help to shape U.S. history.
The first Reconstruction Amendment was Amendment number 13. It was ratified in 1865, the same year that the Civil War ended. The 13th Amendment, the most important thing that you should know about the 13th Amendment is that it abolished slavery. Abraham Lincoln came up with this idea whilst he was still president before being murdered by John Wilkes Booth. Now, Abraham Lincoln passed a law called the Emancipation Proclamation during his time as president in 1863. The only thing about the Emancipation Proclamation is it only applied to states that were in the Union at the time it was passed. All Southern states or members of the Confederacy were not in the Union, so we needed a law that as they came back into the Union, they would also abolish slavery. So this was their ticket back in. So as the 13th Amendment was passed and Southern states started to re-enter the Union, they were no longer allowed to have slavery.
Next, we're going to take a look at the 14th Amendment, because 14 comes after 13. In 1868, it was ratified. It extended the 5th Amendment, which focuses on due process and equal protection for citizens. With this amendment, the federal government's power was also strengthened to have more power over states, which were limiting the rights of African Americans. Not only does it give equal protection and due process to all citizens, it also was a landmark decision for the Supreme Court. Many famous court cases have drawn back to the 14th Amendment to make their ruling, such cases as Roe v. Wade, Brown versus Board, and Bush versus Gore, and everybody remembers those hanging chads.
The last amendment to the United States Constitution from the Reconstruction era is Amendment 15. And Amendment 15 granted suffrage rights, and I know that you remember this from our unit on citizenship. Suffrage means the right to vote, to all men in the United States, regardless of race, color, or PCOS, which means prior condition of servitude. So former slaves who were men were allowed to vote with the passage of the 15th Amendment in 1870. This led not only to greater voting rights for African American males, but also more opportunity for them to participate in the political process as actual elected officials. Now, the problem with this is that Southern states soon found ways around the 15th Amendment through laws that were meant to restrict the rights of African Americans, such as poll taxes or literacy tests, which we will talk about in future lessons.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Reconstruction era.
Scene.